please don't breathe through your mouth. Know that breathing through your mouth is an antagonist to your well-being. It's antagonist to your immune system. And don't just take a pill because you've got a headache. 97% of headaches are because you're dehydrated. Drink water. I believe the breath is a miracle. And in order to get that context, we really need to look at, where did this all begin? It all began with our first...
If you've ever felt anxious, overwhelmed, or stuck in your head, this episode might change the way you live, because we are talking about the one tool you have with you 25,000 times a day. Today's guest is Anthony Abbagnano, founder of Alchemy of Breath and a true pioneer in bringing breathwork online to thousands of people around the world. And you're going to hear a story that is wild. Picture this. Anthony is 7 years old at boarding school. He's lonely, miserable, and a kid hands him a paper bag and says, "Breathe into this." What happens next flips his relationship with suffering forever. We get into why the breath is the most democratic medicine on earth, why so many people feel like they really don't deserve it, and how breath can shift anxiety fast, and why nose breathing and even mouth taping could be a game changer for sleep, stamina, and your nervous system. If you want a calmer mind, a stronger body, and a better relationship with your own life, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Well, Anthony, it's so good to have you on the show. And as I've told you off air, and my audience knows, I am passionate about breathwork. And I'm curious for you, where did you find this? Why is it so? When did you know, like, gosh, this is my journey. This is my swan song, because I think it's amazing. I wish I have a bit of a tinge of jealousy, but I love the work you do. So please tell me your journey.
Well, first of all, no jealousy, because it's available. It's so democratic. Nothing could be as democratic as the breath. It's something that we all get to enjoy. But my journey with breathwork was really initiated by an impactful experience when I was a kid. And I was at boarding school and not very happy, and kind of missed home. You know, I missed my family. I didn't want to be in this institution at 7 years old. And then a kid came up to me and he gave me a paper bag and he said, "Breathe into that." And so I did. And I breathed in and out 20 times. And he came up behind me and he kind of squeezed my chest. And then he helped me down to the ground. And I had the most extraordinary experience of my life. It's like when you're 7, 8 years old, you're away from home, you're lonely, you're feeling a bit wimpy. And it changed my relationship to suffering completely. What happened was that I understood, I guess it's as close as to a near-death experience that you could have. There were no questions anymore. I understood the context of this life that I was in. The things that I thought were important, that I was suffering under, were really not that significant. And I was in touch with something far, far greater than any human could ever have shared with me or taught me or imposed upon me. It was just a spectacular event. And I went beyond galaxies. I saw stars, whatever metaphor you want to have. As a 7 or 8 year old boy, I was stunned. And from that point on, I thought, my God, this is so simple. This is my best friend. I can come back to this, even if no one understands me and everybody thinks I'm the odd one out. Then at least I know where I belong. And so I think I've always had that sense that belonging exists in the breath. And I meet so many people that I work with that feel like they don't belong and they're not worthy and they're unlovable, and all of the stories we experience in our human condition. And the breath is the best medicine for that.
Isn't that fascinating? As you said, it's the most democratic thing in the world. Look, if you're going to live, you're going to breathe. And yet what I heard was you talking about so many people not feeling almost worthy of this incredible gift that we have. And I want to get into all the different types of breath work, but if you were to dispel one thing when it comes to breath work, because again, I talk about it, and I think sometimes people look at me like I'm crazy, and I'm like, it's the one non-negotiable. Like I have 4 every morning, but breath work is the first thing I start with. Um, what are your thoughts when it comes to that? Why is it such a, if I'm out in, let's say I'm out in a busy airport terminal and I'm doing breath work, people are looking at me like I'm crazy, but yet it's truly this amazing gift. I don't know. How do we bring people to this thing of the gift you experience at 7, the gift that I've been experiencing for the last 15 years? Like, how do we bring that to more people?
Well, that's my life's work. It's like the best video game anyone could have ever invented to me, because it's so simple that people don't believe it, first of all. And secondly, what does breath work mean? It partly means that we have to work to pay attention to it, but it also means that breath works. It does something too. It's not like we're in control of the experience we have, but we can apply the experience of breathing to absolutely every single condition or experience we have. And when we do that, it's always going to get better. It's always going to improve in some way. Our understanding will improve. Our awareness will grow. We'll develop a different perspective. We'll shift a stuck state of mind, and we'll come out of the experience with an understanding that we probably didn't have before. So I was the first person to bring breathwork to the internet, and this happened back 12 or 13 years ago because I was ill and I was unable to travel, and I was already working with breathwork, but I couldn't go to live appearances. So it wasn't that I had this great scheme to get breathwork to explode in the world. It was that I was restricted and I needed to find a way to actually get the message out there. So I remember starting my first online breathwork with like 12 people, and that became next week 24, and next week 48, and now we're breathing hundreds of people in each session every week. And I think the most misunderstood thing about breathwork is that we don't deserve it. Something in us that wants to keep us small. And could it really be for me? And I think everybody who uses breathwork as a practice would experience, as one of the primary first stages, resistance, right? Like, oh gosh, I got to slow down this much and pay attention to my breath. Or if we're doing the conscious connected breath, oh boy, my throat feels sore. I need to cough. I need to drink water. I need not to be, this is too much. This is work. I didn't think it was going to be this kind of work. And I think that describes the opportunity. When we experience a sense of resistance, I have always found that when we work with that resistance and we don't try to deny it or hide from it or push our way through, if we actually fully experience it, there's a natural opening to another whole level. And I think that's the other thing that people don't understand about breathwork, is that we're importing a power that's greater than our own. And if you're not willing to believe in a higher power, how can a higher power help you? So it's not just a matter of convenience to believe that this is a higher power. It's also true. It also works. So if you look at any religious document, scriptures, you'll see the breath is always referred to as a supernatural power. The word inspire means importing spirit, bringing spirit in. Now, if you're a spiritual being and that's what floats your boat, you can interpret that any way you will. If you don't feel like you're a spiritual being and you're in the business world and you're high functioning individual in the material plane, well, what about being more spirited with it? What about being more inspired with it? What about, if you're inspired, you're inspiring. So let's say we get going on this and use it in any context that we choose, and notice how much it can really help us.
So I'm glad to hear you're not ill any longer, or at least you look extremely healthy. I'm curious, my direct question would be, how much would you attribute concerted breath work to healing you? Because again, when I talk to various people, when it comes to disease or when it comes to sicknesses, oftentimes it is a lack of oxygen. It is due to inflammation. It is due to nitric oxide levels. So again, I'm not saying that I am a scientist. Everyone that listens to my show knows I'm not, right? I am such an amateur when it comes to, I know a little about a lot of things, and that breathwork happens to be one of those. But I guess my question is, when you go back in time to when you did bring this breathwork to the internet, which thank goodness you did, how much did breathwork really bring you back? And I'm saying, because I want people that are sitting here right now, and maybe they're not feeling that good, and maybe they haven't discovered breathwork, and this might be that opening that says, you know what, give this a try. I'm not suggesting it's a magic pill, but it certainly is something that is universal with every modality. Breathwork is a part of it. So does that question make sense? I know I kind of went on a tangent there, but I was thinking of you being sick, and I thought, I wonder how much breathwork had to do with getting him back to this healthy man that I see before me.
Well, thank you. I am healthy, and I'm grateful for that every morning. I remind myself to be grateful because I'm 71 and I'm kicking butt. I'm just loving life. I'm still on the A train. I teach every day. I research and I study every day, and I have a wonderful, active life. Breath as a healing agent. I think it's the first tool in the box for any psychological, psychosomatic, somatic, physical symptom, and beyond, into the psyche, into the psycho-emotional, into the spiritual realms. I believe breath is the best. It's like aspirin would be in the pharmaceutical world. It's the one pill I would go to. Healing. Well, is healing a process that you ever complete, or is it a state of being? And I would posit that it's a state of being, which means that it's an awareness. If I want to be happy and I tell myself I'm happy, I'll be happier than if I tell myself I'm not. So there's something about fooling the mind and the stories the mind wants to tell us. So let's step away from thinking that healing has an A to Z journey. It's like an A to Z to A to Z to A to Z. It keeps going around in circles, right? And if we say when we do healing inner work that it's like the layers of an onion, but you never actually get to the center of the onion. So we live with healing as an opportunity to be present in every single moment. For me, even that first story I told about being an 8-year-old was an act of healing for me, because I was under this burden of suffering, and the story I was telling myself was that I was miserable, homesick, unlovable. I was half Italian at an English boarding school, which was like not done. So it was me and one Jew in the whole school. And the two of us took all the ribbing, all the teasing, all the marginalizing that you could imagine. The healing that I experienced that first time round was that actually I belong to something bigger than this conversation. And I think this is key, because the more intimacy I develop with my breath, that means even right now, stopping and choosing to pause into a breath, the more I do that, the more it informs me of the next best thing to do in life, whether it's a simple choice or a highly complex one. If I use the breath as my tool, it will always, I've never seen it not work. It always works.
You and I were talking off air before. We had some technical challenges, and thank goodness we got Anthony back on this. But one of the things I find fascinating, whether it's yoga, whether it's my coaches, they talk about breath straight away, ayahuasca journeys, meditation, everything. If you look at it, and this is the revelation I had as you and I were talking, I was like, holy shit. Every single one of them says, let's start with a deep breath and be very conscious and mindful of this breath. And when we were talking, I was like, oh my God, it is the connection to literally everything. And I was asking about my son's playing sports, and it is one of those things. So but we're not taught how to breathe very well. And you and I were talking about the great book Breath by James Nestor, and it's just fascinating that this is, again, our to live we need to breathe, but yet we suck at it. Like, we literally have been these mouth breathers. I talk to help because not everybody's read the book Breath, and I if you haven't, check it out. It's a good one. What are your thoughts when it comes to this? Like, why did we arrive at this mouth breathing place when we clearly were meant to do it a different way?
Yeah. Well, we were given both ways, weren't we? I guess it's a second choice. If you're stuck, if you're really stuck and in trouble and you're like you've got the flu or something like that, at least you have a way to breathe. But I think first some context, because we can talk about these things, but when we talk about them, we tend to distance ourselves from the experience of them themselves. And we tend to intellectualize, and it becomes more of a heady thing. I encourage people when they talk about the breath, because it's so someone comes up to me, what's my elevator pitch? Someone comes up to me in the elevator and say, what do you do for a living? And it's like, God, I teach people how to breathe. Oh, I could learn to do that. It's like, it's all a bit simplified. How can you actually convey the real significance of the breath? So it's more like, hey, if you had a miracle in your pocket and I could show you how to use it, would you be willing to do that? Because I believe the breath is a miracle. And in order to get that context, we really need to look at, where did this all begin? It all began with our first inhalation. And that first inhalation kickstarted our whole independent life. That first inhalation was our first act of agency in our human existence. I mean, that is huge. We didn't just embrace the wholeness and the mystery and the unconditional love for life, that claim for life, but we also kickstarted our autoimmune system. We kickstarted our nervous system. We cleared out any excess liquid that was left in our lungs from the womb. And, there's a lot going on that we don't pay attention to. And then let's fast forward to that moment that none of us have yet reached, but we all will reach. Like, there's no one gets out alive, right? So we're going to have that last breath. And that breath is total surrender, right? I mean, no matter how much we battle, we fight to stay alive, there comes a moment where there is utter surrender, an unconditional surrender. And yet we're doing this cycle of repeating the first breath, and I like to say practicing the last breath 25,000 times a day. And how often are we aware of that? A couple of times, because I ran out. I was climbing the steps and I had to pause, or I saw something so awe-inspiring that it took my breath away, or I just got upset, so I started panting, and maybe I get pains in my chest because I'm panicking. Those are the times that we notice it. We don't notice it the rest of the time, let alone understand that act of agency is available to us 25,000 days. That act of utter surrender is also available to us 25,000 times a day. Now, if you considered that those were tools we could use, when is it I need that will to have agency? And when is it I need to have the awareness that this is a battle I don't need to fight? I can actually relax. The flow will take care of me. And so we all talk about the flow state. We want to achieve that flow state. The best way to achieve the flow state is with your breath, because that's what it is. It is the flow state. So if you want to achieve that flow state in whatever condition you're in, from the worst possible physical suffering that you could be in to optimization, excelling at any sport or whatever it might be, the breath is going to be your first go-to. Now, nose and mouth, and as James says in his book, breathe, please don't breathe through your mouth. Know that breathing through your mouth is antagonist to your well-being. It's antagonist to your immune system, and breathing through the nose is also an antagonist to your stamina. If you breathe through your mouth, you will exhaust yourself more quickly if you breathe through your mouth. You also might start snoring. You'll probably develop sleep apnea earlier on in your life as a result of breathing through your mouth, which is why people, and I make sure my wife does every single night, I help her with the tape, right? I tease her. I said, there's a gap there. I don't want to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just going to make sure that one's closed too. So breathing through your mouth is not a practice that you should do unconsciously. Now, that said, when we have breath sessions and we do conscious connected breath, we do sometimes breathe through the mouth because we want to charge with oxygen that much more quickly. And so in a controlled circumstance, and if there's someone with you and you're safe, then it is okay to do it for short periods of time. But the rest of our lives, we should, even if you're climbing a mountain, even if you're running the 100 meters sprint, you should be breathing through your nose in ideal circumstances.
Yeah, and I will say it takes a lot of effort when you're in these exhaustion moments. I constantly, my son plays tennis, and I'm always, when he's having those moments where I can see him really chest breathing, my first thing is always slow down and breathe through your nose, and it's really challenging for him. You have to practice, right? It's something just like anything. You actually need to practice it. You mentioned the mouth tape, and I was going to go there because I was curious on your take on this. It's like a mouth guard. It's called Mu X, I think is the name. And
Yeah.
I use that instead of the mouth tape, but it's the same idea. I want to breathe through my nose and not through my mouth. Why is it just, again, 8 hours, 6 hours where we need to help our body to not breathe through the mouth? That's the whole idea of mouth tape. Can you simplify it? Because I think if I'm sitting here right now and I've never done mouth tape, I've heard this thing, but why would I really do that, Anthony? That's what I think the audience is probably screaming. Like, well, okay, tell me why this isn't just horseshit and more marketing. I think that's what I would be thinking, at least the first time I thought about mouth tape. I'm curious what you would kind of say to that.
Yeah, well, I'm like you. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist. And I'll give my best stab at it from a humanist layperson's point of view. And by the way, if you look at James Nestor's book, you'll see photographs of people and the distortions of their face that happen as a result of breathing through their mouth. So the stakes are pretty high because those photographs are shocking. There's no other word than shocking for them. Face distortions, lopsided faces, teeth issues, jaw issues, recessed jaw, all kinds of things that happen as a result of breathing through the mouth. So the stakes are high, and the sleep issue with the mouth is because we just fall into mouth breathing unconsciously. And that's why mouth taping became so fashionable now. Many people are doing it. I think the Mu device was invented by Dr. Mu, and I know also my wife and I have done mewing, which was this practice he has of putting the top of your tongue against the palate and exercising your jaw muscles that way, which also helps us with issues like snoring at night and sleep apnea. But the taping is not giving us an alternative to breathing through the nose. So what are the advantages of breathing through the nose? You said it earlier on, it's that nitric oxide. Now they've created ointments with nitric oxide to help heal wounds more quickly. The fact that you're stimulating nitric oxide generation in your upper respiratory tract, especially after a respiratory disease like the pandemic that we experienced a few years ago, the idea of developing more resilience and boosting my immune system with nitric oxide as a way of being becomes kind of tempting, right? So that's my case for avoiding mouth breathing. Another example is if you consider high altitude training, where people are exerting themselves when there's not as much oxygen in the air, This is all a part of becoming more accustomed to breathing through your nose. Now, in my house in Italy, I have to go up like about 65 steps to get to it. There's no parking there. It's in a little village on a hill, and that's how I get there. And I can tell the difference if I'm going up that hill and I am breathing through my mouth, or if I'm going up that hill and I'm breathing through my nose. If I'm breathing through my mouth, I get to like step 30 and I'm like, okay, I have to take a break. It's getting too intense. If I breathe through my nose, I'll probably go 10% slower, but I can double the distance. So there's something about that stamina aspect that I don't want to deplete my exhaust of breath, and I don't want to hurry with my inhale. If they're more measured, I can last longer. And I can think of lots of different circumstances where that will be helpful, including the bedroom. So consider that. Learning how to measure your breath is one of the best tools that you can have.
You mentioned the nervous system and anxiety is what I heard. I don't know if you said that word, but I've always had a challenge with anxiety because I don't really understand it. I've only experienced it, I think, one time in New York and several times after being too hungover. Like that's the only time I think like, gosh, I kind of understand what this feels like. I feel like that people that feel this feeling as, and I'm seeing you as a little boy at 7 having these panic attacks, these anxiety, this like it's not a good feeling. How would you tell somebody to really slow down so that they can offset this? Because I'm thinking of one specific woman. I can see her. I won't say her name, but she struggles with the nervous system, which is leading to all kinds of different challenges.
Mm.
And I don't want her to feel that way. And I want to give her a prescription, quote unquote. I want to give her, introduce her to something that's going to say, you know what? Here's the most simple way to perhaps get your nervous system reset, to perhaps slow down your anxiety so you're not feeling this. I mean, it's awful. If people feel that often, that is awful. How would you, again, what would you say to that person to say, you know what, I have something that really could be a helpful tool? What would that look like?
Well, there is a breath practice that I use particularly for anxiety. But I think we need to look at it just a little bit in the bigger picture because we assume anxiety is a negative thing. Mm. And that's an assumption that gives it more power than it needs to have. And so here's the unique thing about breath. Breath is a way that we can reverse manipulate a condition. But it's also a way that we can diagnose what a condition is. So you spoke about chest breathing earlier on, and some people are chest breathers, some people are belly breathers. They tend to prefer one or the other. We use that as diagnosis for the kind of life they live. A chest breather is someone who's more in control of life. A belly breather is someone who's perhaps more sensitive, more in touch with their emotional realms, and those are kind of like, I wouldn't say they're opposites, but they're very different conditions of being. So when you're anxious, you breathe a short breath. When you go toward a panic state, your breath gets even shorter. You begin to hyperventilate. So what would be the solution if you want the opposite effect? It would be to lengthen your breath. And so you can lengthen especially your exhale, and that will begin to affect your level of anxiety. Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt therapy, said that if you breathe less than 6 times a minute, you cannot be anxious. It takes a couple of minutes, but you cannot be anxious. So I can give you a breath pattern for anxiety specifically, but before we just apply the Band-Aid on the condition when it comes, it is functional and it does work. We can reverse manipulate the anxiety if we give precedence and priority to a breath pattern. And in a sense, it doesn't matter what breath pattern it is because you're making the choice to employ a breath pattern. And one of the awful things about anxiety which I see as on the spectrum of eventually trauma, is the closer we go up the gauge and towards the red, sorry, this way for you on screen, then the less range of choice we have available, the less range of choice we become aware of. And this is the awful thing about anxiety. You know what that surge is like. I feel it even just talking about it. I can feel it in my belly. It wants to rise into my chest. It wants to go into my throat. And it's like a rising paralysis that is going to make me pant because I don't have the amplitude of my faculties. I don't have a lung that I can fill or a belly that can be soft. I'm hardening and I'm contracting. And so now we come to the underlying reasons for anxiety, and we're predisposed to anxiety because there's a much deeper injury or damage or trauma that has not yet been met. And it will show up in a superficial anxiety. So it's one thing to, let's say, master the symptom and re-engineer the cause of that symptom, which is the anxiety. But I would not just work from the top down, I would work from the bottom up. And so we begin to then enter the realms of trauma resolution or trauma relationship that we've all suffered. And 99% of us don't want to go there. We're going to cover up that trauma with layers of forgetting, I call it, conveniences, distractions, coping systems, whatever they are. I don't want to remember that anymore. I'm going to block it. Some of us even forget about it. We completely dissociate so far that we think it didn't even happen. And that's not helping because that will show up. It's like the valve, there has to be some exit valve for this pressure that's building up, not just in the psyche, but also in the body. It will out. And the way it will come out is where the weakest point is. And that is usually anxiety. Sometimes it's disease too. Chronic disease can occur because of unresolved trauma as well. So we know that in simple physiological terms. I damaged my knee playing rugby when I was a 14-year-old. And of course, now at my age of 71, it's like, how much longer can I keep this knee? You know, it becomes a fixture in your life later on. At first, it was like, nah, I got another one. I'll go skiing anyway, and I'll push myself anyway. But actually, it comes back to get you in the last part of your life. So any of those body sensations that we feel need to be listened to because our body is giving us information that we need to learn to interpret and understand. The challenge is that we've been taught our whole life to look outside of ourselves for the solutions we need. And that began quite reasonably with a nipple, or I need to be changed. I'm chafing. I'm sore. I'm wet. That was legitimate. What happened when we learned that we had to comply with a world that's not overly friendly and not overly caring is that we learned that we couldn't care for ourselves anymore. And so therefore we learned to blame the outer world for our condition, and we learned to look to the outer world for our solutions. And those solutions show up in all kinds of forms, from pills to addictions to TV, to distractions, whichever way it may show up. So there's something relevant here. I think there was a survey that Mo Gadat did, and he was the chief business officer for Google for many years, an Egyptian man, a very smart man. And he started a happiness project. And as a part of this, his goal is to have 1 billion people on the planet happy before he dies. This goal came as a result of him losing his son a few years ago. And he did a survey of 12,000 people and asked them if they would like to have their trauma removed. And he offered them the opportunity to remove it entirely. And over 98% of those people said, no, I'll keep my trauma. Why? Well, think of all the friends you made. Think of all the strength you developed. think of all the abilities you have that had you not been challenged, you would have just got a bit limp-wristed and you wouldn't have met those challenges. So if people want to keep their trauma when they really think about it, then it becomes a question of, okay, it's not about trauma release. It's not about getting rid of trauma. It's not going to go away. It happened. But what we can do is create a relationship with it. So the things that we fear, the anger that we feel, those things that we call negative emotions, we actually, if we turn toward them, the anxiety that occurs, if we turn towards them and we create conversations with them, as a way of saying it, if we create an affinity or a familiarity with them, they're far less threatening than if we keep trying to keep them at bay. They'll just be like our shadow and they'll stick to us. So what I'm saying is trauma won't go away, but it can be our greatest teacher if we know how to meet it. And body symptoms that we're feeling are asking us to pay attention to them. Don't just take a pill because you've got a headache. 97% of headaches are because you're dehydrated. Drink water. Think of every sign your body gives as a message that we haven't really been taught how to understand, and consider that the doorway to a whole new resource level. Consider 20% of the data is going from the brain to the body and 80% is going the other way. Like, we're missing a whole load of data here. And we're trying to make the choices with the 20%. Listen to the body. Let the body be a part of our emotional and our choice-making process.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty profound. Several things that you said. The 98% thing, just, gosh, man, here's somebody trying to give a gift and at least 98% are like, no, I don't want to face it. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to, I'm going to keep it the way it is. Even if my life isn't happy. It's fascinating to me, Anthony. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, I mean, Mo's message was that they keep the trauma because of the benefits they got. It's not that they'll keep it and they don't want to deal with it. It's like, no, I'll learn from it. Or think of all the gifts that we got out of this. And how many times have you faced what seemed like an insurmountable challenge that turned out to be bounty?
Every time. I mean, there's lessons, right? Every time.
Yeah. And that I think is what we're talking about with this. Trauma can be our teacher. It doesn't have to haunt us.
Yeah, and the other thing, the 20% to the 80%, and 80%, your body's trying to tell you to your brain, and yet we're not paying attention to it.
Yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. There's so many different forms of breathwork practices, like alkalinity, alkaline breathwork. There's box breathing. There's dynamic. There's so many different forms. And I know I talk about box breathing often for people that in short things that they want to deal with. Is there one that's greater than the others? I'm just curious because you had asked me what's my form of breathwork, and my answer was interesting because I've done the nasal breathing, like the one nasal in, the other nasal. I've done all these different forms. What I've found for me, when it's a really dynamic breathwork, and when I'm able to release and not have air for a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, whatever it is, I feel like I get the most bang for my buck. It's like, so I got the 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever the breaths I'm doing, right? And if it's through the mouth or through the nose, I haven't found that to be a big, significant difference for me. But that release, and today was really fascinating. So I did 3 rounds of dynamic breathwork, is what I would call it. And normally I can hold it for, a minute and a half or so. But today was really challenging. Like I felt like I was gasping for air. I don't know why, but the absolute, blissful feeling when I was able to get that breath, I'm constantly seeking that. So it's interesting. I'm asking a lot in that question, but thoughts on the type of breath work, if one were to start doing it on a daily, what do you feel is most beneficial?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd give half the value of that question to the fact that one is choosing to use the breath. That's actually half the work, because you're giving the priority to the breath rather than to the story you're telling yourself. So that's a huge step. Just showing up is a huge step. Asking that question is a huge step. Earlier on, I talked about the context, and that was the first and last breath of life. I think there's also the proportion to understand. We know that with quantum physics, the very act of giving our attention to electron flow will change the way those electrons do flow. So we know that by giving our attention to something, it will shift. Reality will actually change because we're giving our attention to something. So making that choice and giving your attention to something are two of the primary steps that you're doing. You realize I haven't even talked about a breath pattern yet.
Yeah.
You know, once we've agreed that's what it is, giving your attention to one breath can be a pivotal moment in your entire life story. It can change the rest of your life, just giving your attention to one breath. And I've seen that happen thousands of times, because what happens during that one breath is you're given space and opportunity to reflect, to consider, and to become creative instead of reactive. And I like to say, you know, in those situations where you want to react, stop, take a breath, make a commitment to take one breath, short, long, whatever it is. No style, no conditions, no technique. Just the choice that you're making is going to give you the opportunity to change everything. You're going to be able to change that word react, which is R-E-A-C-T. You're going to take that C, put it to the beginning of the word, and you're going to have create instead of react. So if you want to be creative instead of reactive, make that your commitment as a result of today. Whenever I feel the pressure mounting, I'm going to take a breath. Have you ever noticed in any conversation when it becomes heated and there's a group of people, the person who says, hey, let's just take a breath here, is always the wise one? That's because they're bringing wisdom. It's a wise thing to do. So it starts with that one choice. Then I'd say the remaining 40% of this world of breath work, then we begin to look at technique and what are the techniques that I can employ in order to get the outcomes that I want. And some of them are very measurable and scientific. The experience of you speaking of dynamic breathing and then going into a breath hold, physiologically what's happening is you are manipulating the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your bloodstream. You're also denying your frontal lobe oxygen while you're dynamic breathing. You're actually lowering the oxygen levels in your frontal lobe. And then when you do the breath hold, the carbon dioxide and oxygen in your bloodstream is readjusting, and it will reach a level where you will import a surge of oxygen into your frontal lobe. And that's often what gives us that sense of, wow, like, oh my gosh, that is impactful. And we think differently. So dynamic breathing is very powerful to do that. We do a form of dynamic breath work at Alchemy, and a session would last between half an hour and an hour and a half. And when you're connecting your breath, and that's not just consciously breathing, that's now connecting my breath. So that means at the top of my inhale, I immediately start the exhale, and instead of stopping at the bottom, I keep that flow. Imagine a violin solo or sea coming onto the beach, the waves coming on. They're either in or out, always in or out, no stalling or pausing. So being aware of one breath is going to change everything. It's going to change the equivalent of electron flow. When you connect those breaths and you stack them one on top of the other, then we're talking a whole different realm. We're not just changing our perspective and creating space. We're now using that space to, number one, reenact choice, that first act of agency in our life. I'm going to do that again and again and again consciously for half an hour. or an hour or an hour and a half, oh my goodness, we lose track of time. We lose track of sequential thought. And then what do we gain as a result of that? What is it that's going on in between my thoughts? I mean, I've got so many of these thoughts that the Buddhists say 60,000 a day. What would happen if I stopped them for 5 minutes? What could I be aware of then? So we look at a different kind of noticing, and as we notice things differently, then different things can happen. If we don't notice what's different, everything will stay the same, and we'll listen to the same narratives that we've learnt to live inside of. If we start to look for what's different about our experience, we're going to be opening to something that we don't yet know. And if we take that approach to a dynamic breath work or a conscious connected breath session, it yields in extraordinary ways, not just in ways of awareness, but also in ways of physical recovery from different conditions. I've had people coming with a flu come out the other end of a breath work, and the flu is gone. You hyper process things like that. I've had even one person who couldn't see in one eye who got her sight back in a breath session. I've had people with chronic illnesses and pains that disappear in one session. I've had couples that haven't expressed their care for each other for 25 years re-begin their relationship after one breath session. The quantum leaps of possibility become a little bit more normal. And it leads one to question, gosh, dang, the way we live and what we call normal is really a very diminished form of what we can be as human beings. You know, we use the word miracle. That'd be a miracle, like, that's never going to happen to me. But, and we think of a miracle as this random coup de grace, you know, something that's going to come out of the sky and make my hair go dark again or whatever. But actually, we're a 33 trillion to 1 chance of being alive. It takes 33 trillion sperm, and one of them is going to make it into the egg at the right time of day, at the right time of the month, and during the fertile period of a woman's life. And that egg that we're going to fertilize was actually in that woman's mother before it was in that woman. Are we not a miracle? I mean, what is it going to take for us this gives me goosebumps every time I say it. What is it going to take for us to wake up that we are living miracles? We are the chosen ones to be here in this human experience. So enough of the stories. Get on your miracle horse and ride.
As you were talking and describing, I think of what a gift it really is. Every morning when I do this, and I mean it sincerely, and I only do, guys, so I'm clear, I do 11 minutes every single day of very, very intentional breath work. Do I think about it other times during the day? Of course. When I go to sleep, I wear the mute, all that. But for 11 minutes, what he's talking about, this quantum leap, this thing, it's very difficult to describe unless you really try. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. Selfishly, I could ask you a question all day, Anthony. You're fascinating. I guess my last question that I'm curious on, is there one impactful lesson that you learned from a mentor, from a book, a teacher, someone that just something short? I always like to leave our audience with something short that they can say, God, I never got that lesson. Was there one that stands out in your mind?
I think the most illuminating thing to me came from studying Joseph Campbell, who is the man who introduced the concept of the hero's journey. And what struck me was the inevitability of something that's waiting to happen. So no matter, especially if one is feeling overwhelmed or overstressed or over anything, and it's unpleasant, we tend to fall out of that awareness that something else is actually waiting to happen. It's as simple as the second hand on my watch is going to move to the next second. But we tell ourselves that this is it. We suffer. We go into a state of suffering. And when we do that, we abandon our agency. We abandon our ability to notice what that thing is. We'll be so busy using our bandwidth, listening to our own story, that we won't notice when the opportunity to change occurs, or that there is something different to notice rather than the same story we tell ourselves. And I love that, because no matter how, I work with people who are challenged with life, and I have one founder who exited and is a relatively young man, at least to me, and is finding himself in hyper depression. He's achieved success in every other level. He's got so much accolade. He's in his space a very well known, very respected man. But here's a man who's lost his will to live because it's just so dark. So how can we encourage people in these conditions to stay alert to what that thing's going to be? Because if we're not alert that it's going to happen, it won't. The red car that went past your window right now, it didn't happen for you. But if you'd looked out the window and you saw it, then you would know that it happened. So I think that not to lose our ability to notice when we're under duress, and that's because something else is waiting to happen.
It's beautiful, brother. Guys, I'll link everything, how to find Anthony. He's not hard to find. I'm so blessed and humble, and I'm so glad you were here, brother. I appreciate your insight.
Wow.
And like you said, we didn't talk a lot about the functionality of the breath work. So much of this was so much more about being intentional and really being aware. And I just thank you, brother. It was amazing.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really honored that I could be with you, and I'd love to talk. I could do this for hours. This is what I love to do. So anything I can do to help anybody out there who's in a tough stage or wants to optimize, that's exactly what we're about at Alchemy. So help us help you.
Amazing. Thank you. If this episode hits you, do not just nod your head and move on. Do something with it. Take one intentional breath right now. Slow inhale, a longer exhale. Give yourself that space that Anthony talked about, the space where you create instead of react. As you know, Anthony Abbagnano is the founder of Alchemy of Breath, the creator behind the Breathe the World movement, and a leader in making breathwork accessible globally through online sessions and trainings. He also founded Asha in Tuscany, Italy, a home for retreats and deep healing work. If you want to go deeper, check out Anthony's work at Alchemy of Breath and look up his book, Outer Chaos, Inner Calm. I'll link everything in the show notes. And if you know somebody battling anxiety, stress, burnout, or just feeling disconnected, send them this episode. It might be the simplest lifeline that they've been missing. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for sharing. And as always, let's go win.